Most people think food safety is simple. Cook it properly and you're fine. Reheat it and it's basically the same food, just warm again. That assumption feels obvious. It also happens to be wrong, and for a small number of everyday foods, it's wrong in ways that quietly add up over years. Today we're going through for foods that change in ways you can't see, smell, or taste the moment you reheat them. None of this requires throwing food away in fear. It just requires understanding what's actually happening inside the container before you put it back on the stove or in the microwave. Let's start with rice, because this one surprises almost everyone. Rice is one of the most common leftovers in the world. You cook a big batch, portion it out, and reheat it for days. The problem isn't the rice itself. It's a bacterium called Bacillus cereus, and it's present in raw rice almost everywhere, in basically every kitchen on the planet. Cooking kills the active bacteria. What it doesn't kill are the spores, which are essentially dormant survival capsules that can withstand boiling temperatures. Here's where it gets relevant. Once rice is cooked and starts cooling on the counter, those spores can wake up and start multiplying, especially in that window between hot off the stove and refrigerator cold. As they multiply, some strains produce a toxin. And this toxin is heat stable, meaning reheating the rice the next day kills the bacteria again, but does nothing to the toxin that was already produced overnight. You end up eating a toxin that survived the very process meant to make the food safe again. The symptoms aren't subtle, usually nausea and vomiting within a few hours, sometimes diarrhea. It's one of the more common causes of food poisoning linked to home-cooked leftovers, and it's almost entirely preventable. The fix is straightforward. Get cooked rice into the fridge within about an hour of cooking, spread it out so it cools quickly instead of sitting in one warm, dense block, and try to eat it within a day or two. When you reheat it, make sure it's steaming hot all the way through, not just warm on the surface. The second food is one that gets recommended constantly for being healthy, and that's exactly why this catches people off guard: leafy greens like spinach, kale, and chard. Fresh, these vegetables are genuinely excellent for you. The issue shows up after they've been cooked, stored, and then reheated. Leafy greens naturally contain compounds called nitrates. On their own, nitrates aren't dangerous. But once the food is cooked and sitting in the fridge, bacteria that are naturally present can slowly convert some of those nitrates into nitrites. Then, when you apply heat a second time, those nitrites can react with proteins in the food and form a different class of compounds called nitrosamines. Nitrosamines are the same general category of compound that international health agencies have flagged in the context of certain processed and cured meats, and the concern is the same regardless of the source. Repeated, chronic exposure over years is the issue, not a single meal. To be clear, eating leftover sautéed spinach once isn't going to harm you. The concern is the habit, cooking a big batch of greens and reheating portions of it day after day for years. The practical fix is almost embarrassingly simple. Cooked leafy greens are genuinely good cold. Toss them into a grain bowl, a wrap, or a salad straight from the fridge. If you do want them warm, the better habit is to only cook the portion you're going to eat that meal, rather than batch cooking and repeatedly reheating the same pot over several days. Third on the list is chicken, and this one is less about chemistry and more about something most people get wrong with their microwave specifically. You roast or pan-cook chicken thighs or breasts. They're done all the way through, you portion the leftovers, and the next day you microwave a piece for a couple of minutes. The outside feels hot when you touch it, so you eat it. Here's the part that catches people off guard. Microwaves don't heat food evenly. They work by exciting water molecules, and different parts of a piece of meat have different water content, density, and fat distribution. That means a piece of chicken can have spots, sometimes right in the center, that never get hot enough to be safe, even while the outside is steaming. These are usually called cold spots, and you genuinely cannot detect them by touch or appearance. Why this matters specifically with chicken is that raw poultry very commonly carries bacteria like Salmonella and Campylobacter. Proper initial cooking takes care of that. But if the leftover chicken has been sitting in the fridge and picks up even a small amount of recontamination from a cutting board, your hands, or the container, those cold spots in a microwave reheat can become exactly the kind of warm, moist environment where bacteria multiply rather than die. A full-blown case of food poisoning is the obvious risk, but there's also a quieter pattern: repeated low-level exposures that aren't severe enough to send you to the hospital but are enough to put your gut through repeated rounds of inflammation. The fix here is mostly about method. If you're reheating chicken, the oven is more reliable than the microwave because it heats more evenly throughout. If you do use a microwave, cut the chicken into smaller, more uniform pieces first, use a lower power setting, and stir or rearrange halfway through so heat distributes more evenly. Or, honestly, just eat it cold in a salad. Cold chicken is perfectly safe as long as it was properly cooked and stored, and it sidesteps the entire cold spot problem. The fourth and final one is potatoes, and this is the only item on this list where the word cancer has a real, documented basis, so let's be precise about it. When starchy foods like potatoes are cooked at high temperatures, especially roasted, fried, or browned, a compound called acrylamide can form. This is the same chemical reaction responsible for that golden brown color and crispy texture everyone loves. Acrylamide has been studied extensively, and based largely on animal research, international health agencies classify it as a probable human carcinogen. The evidence in humans is less conclusive than in animal studies, but the concern was significant enough that food safety agencies in multiple countries have issued guidance on reducing acrylamide exposure through cooking methods. Here's the part that's specifically relevant to leftovers. When a potato is cooked, then refrigerated, its surface dries out and sugars concentrate near that dried surface. When you reheat that potato at high heat, particularly by frying or crisping it again, the conditions for acrylamide formation are actually more favorable than they were the first time around. So a reheated, re-crisped roast potato can end up with a higher acrylamide content than it had originally. There's also a second, completely separate thing happening with potatoes that's worth knowing, even though it's not a cancer issue. When potatoes are cooked and then fully cooled, some of their starch converts into what's called resistant starch, which behaves more like fiber. It's digested more slowly, which is generally good for blood sugar. The moment you reheat the potato at high heat, much of that resistant starch converts back to regular, rapidly digested starch. So a cold potato and a reheated hot potato aren't quite the same food metabolically, even though they look identical. The practical takeaway for potatoes is straightforward. A cold potato salad, made from potatoes that were cooked and then properly cooled, is a genuinely solid choice. You keep the resistant starch benefit, and you don't add any extra acrylamide. If you want them warm, gentle reheating with steam, or low heat is better than refrying or re-roasting at high heat. And the habit to actually avoid is taking already cooked potatoes and throwing them back into hot oil to re-crisp them. So to bring this together, rice needs to be cooled fast and reheated thoroughly because of a heat-stable toxin that reheating can't undo. Leafy greens are better eaten cold if they've been sitting around, because repeated heating can push naturally occurring compounds toward a less favorable form. Chicken needs even heat, not just a hot-feeling exterior, because of where bacteria can hide. And potatoes are better cold or gently reheated, because high heat re-crisping pushes a known carcinogen-forming reaction further than the original cooking did. None of this means you need to throw out your leftovers or stop meal prepping. It means a few small adjustments: how fast you cool things, how you reheat them, and which foods are actually better cold, can quietly remove most of the risk. If this was useful, think about which of these 4 habits you're doing right now without realizing it, and that's probably the one worth changing first.